Ladies and gentlemen, every day begins with a decision, a quiet one, a silent confrontation between chaos and order, between aimlessness and structure, between who you were yesterday and who you could become. And that decision, that invisible confrontation, starts the moment your eyes open. Before the world floods in, before the noise of traffic, the pressure of time, the obligations of work, the opinions of others, you are presented with the sacred stillness of morning. That is where mastery begins, not in some grand event, not at some perfect moment, but in the ordinary act of meeting the morning with discipline, with intention, and with a willingness to take responsibility for the direction of your life. The world is hard, life is complex. That's not a cynical observation, it's an accurate one. Pain is inevitable, uncertainty is constant. And if you don't have a solid structure in place, routine that disciplines your body and sharpens your mind, then you'll be swept away by the day before it even begins. That's what the morning is, an invitation to build a fortress within yourself before the storm arrives. And the storm always arrives, sometimes in the form of failure, sometimes in the form of conflict, sometimes in the form of that subtle but soul, wearing fatigue that whispers, "Why bother?" But you don't answer the storm when it comes, you answer it before it comes. And that means mastering the morning. The reason most people are lost is not because they are unintelligent. It's not because they're lazy or weak. It's because they have no structure, no daily ritual that grounds them in purpose, no discipline that arms them against the chaos of the world. But the morning, that sacred window of time before the world knocks at your door, is the one part of the day you still control. It is not yet corrupted by the opinions of others, the failures of the past, or the fears of the future. It is untouched, it is yours, and it is in those first moments that your identity is forged or forgotten. You don't rise early to impress. You don't rise early to check a box or fit into some productivity hack. You rise early to meet yourself in the quiet, to hold yourself accountable, to stare into the mirror of the morning and decide who you're going to be when the day tries to convince you to be less, because the day will test you. It will push you to compromise your values, to betray your potential, to ignore your calling. And if you haven't built something solid inside, you will fold under that pressure. You will break. But if you face the morning with discipline, if you've structured your start with intention, then you have already defeated the worst part of the day, your own apathy. The reason structure is so powerful is because it doesn't lie. You either did the work or you didn't. You either rose when the alarm rang or you negotiated with weakness. And that is the first battle of the day. Will you obey what is highest in you, or will you surrender to what is easiest? The body wants comfort, the mind wants clarity, but clarity only comes through discipline. The soul wants peace, but peace is earned through confrontation with chaos, with the unknown, and with the darker parts of yourself. And that confrontation must begin before the world wakes up, before the excuses arrive, before the doubt creeps in. There is something sacred about rising when the rest of the world sleeps. It's a rebellion against mediocrity. It's a declaration that you are not at the mercy of time. You are its master. That you do not live reactively, constantly responding to the demands of the day, but proactively, rooted in structure and grounded in values. This is not about being a morning person. This is not about some cliché motivational slogan. This is about taking the one part of the day that is still yours and using it to build a mind and a spirit capable of withstanding the trials to come. You must understand that the human being is capable of great darkness. Laziness is not just a weakness. It is a doorway to despair. Neglect is not just inaction. It is destruction wearing a polite face. When you abandon the discipline of your mornings, you don't just lose time. You lose your identity. You begin to drift. And drift is the beginning of death, not physical death, but the death of vision, of purpose, of clarity. The world does not need more people who simply exist. It needs individuals who stand upright, who think clearly, who speak truthfully, and who act with intention. And that kind of individual is not born by accident. That kind of individual is built deliberately, daily, and especially in the morning. Think about it. What is the alternative? Wake up late, scramble to catch up, start your day already defeated. Your physiology responds. You breathe shallower, you move faster but without direction, you react instead of act. And before you know it, you've lost another day, another opportunity to move forward, another chance to align with your highest potential. And these days don't just disappear. They stack, they compound, they build a life. And one day you look in the mirror and realize you've become a stranger to your own potential. Not because you weren't capable, but because you let your mornings be stolen by chaos. So, what does it mean to master the morning? It means rising with purpose. It means designing a structure that disciplines your emotions, sharpens your thinking, and ignites your action. It means meeting the silence with strength. Maybe that means reading, maybe that means writing, maybe it's cold showers or meditation or exercise or prayer. It doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside. What matters is that you're engaging in ritual. Ritual that says, I will not surrender this day to randomness. I will not begin in chaos. I will build myself first, so the world cannot unbuild me later. You don't master the morning in one day. You master it through repetition. Through thousands of small victories, through choosing to get up when comfort calls you back to bed, through putting pen to paper when distraction beckons, through sweat and stillness and silence, through confronting the void and saying, I know who I am and I know where I'm going. Because once you can win the morning, you realize you can win the day. And once you can win the day, you realize you can win your life. Not perfectly, not without failure, but with increasing strength, increasing clarity, increasing resilience. The morning is your training ground, your laboratory, your battlefield, and the victories you win there are not for show. They are for survival. Modern life will try to rob you of that sacred time. Notifications, emails, distractions masquerading as urgency, but urgency without direction is chaos, and chaos unchecked will consume your mind, your time, your purpose. The only way to beat that chaos is to meet it head on, with structure, with silence, with truth. And the only time you can do that consistently is before the world gets loud, before the expectations come rushing in, before your energy is drained by everyone else's demands. That's why the morning matters. It is the time you reclaim yourself. People often ask how to become more confident, more focused, more driven. But the answer is not found in some motivational video. It is found in the discipline of doing hard things when no one is watching. Rising when you don't feel like it. Moving when you don't want to. Choosing structure over chaos, order over ease. Confidence is earned in solitude. Identity is forged in silence. Purpose is found in stillness. And all of those things are cultivated in the morning, when the only voice that matters is the one in your own mind. You must stop negotiating with weakness. You must stop giving your mornings away to comfort and laziness. You must reclaim that first hour as sacred territory, because what you do in the morning sets the tone for everything else. It decides whether you act or react, whether you lead or follow, whether you create or consume. Whether you live deliberately or drift aimlessly, and you don't get that back. Time is not a renewable resource. What you waste today, you cannot recover tomorrow, but what you invest today with discipline and clarity and intention, that becomes your future. The morning is not just a time. It is a philosophy. It is the belief that the smallest actions done with intention compound into the greatest transformations. It is the belief that before you can conquer the world, you must conquer yourself. That before you can speak truth, you must first silence the lies inside you. That before you can lead others, you must first lead your own mind. And that kind of leadership begins in the darkness, in the silence, in the solitude, before the sun even rises. And so you rise, not because it's easy, but because it's right. You rise to discipline your flesh, to focus your mind, to strengthen your will. You rise to reject the drift of mediocrity and claim the power of intentional living. You rise to meet the day, not with fear, but with resolve. Because when you master the morning, you teach yourself that you are not a victim of time. You are a steward of it. You are not waiting to be motivated. You are becoming someone who acts despite emotion. That is mastery, that is freedom, and that is built when no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when the world still sleeps and the battlefield of the day lies untouched. That is when you decide what kind of life you are going to live. Not once, not twice, but every single morning, because greatness isn't built in a moment. It's built in the mundane, in the routine, in the repetition, in the decision to rise again, to fight again, to become again. Even when you're tired, even when you're alone, especially then, because that's when it matters most. That's when identity is forged. That's when destiny is shaped. Not in the spotlight, but in the silence. And if you want to become someone worthy of the struggle, someone capable of carrying weight, someone who does not fold under pressure, you must begin where it all starts, in the morning, where it's still dark, where it's still quiet, where the world hasn't yet told you who to be, and in that silence you speak, not with words, but with action. You speak by rising, by moving, by choosing discipline over comfort. You speak by saying, this day belongs to purpose, not distraction. That is how you begin. That is how you build. That is how you master the morning. And through it, master yourself. There is a moment each day when everything is still. Before the traffic starts humming, before notifications start flooding your phone, before responsibilities and expectations begin to pull you in 100 directions, there is quiet. That moment is not meaningless. It is the most powerful moment of your day. It is not just the beginning of the day, it is the beginning of a decision, and that decision sets a trajectory that shapes not only your hours, but your character. That decision is the choice between chaos and order, the choice between falling into life's random flow or rising to meet it with clarity, structure, and purpose. The reason this moment matters is because it is where your values are tested before anything else gets a say. When the alarm rings, your first confrontation is not with the world, it's with yourself. Will you obey what you know is right, or will you obey what is comfortable? Will you rise to shape the day, or will you wait and react to it? This is not about waking up early to win some productivity contest. It's about confronting the very nature of your existence, that without discipline, chaos takes over, not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, subtly, and soon enough the foundation begins to crack. Chaos is the natural state of life. Everything tends toward disorder unless you do something about it. Your body falls apart without exercise. Your mind becomes dull without study. Your relationships decay without intention, and your purpose dissolves without structure. This is not pessimism, it's truth. And the earlier in the day you face that truth, the more power you have to do something about it. That's why the morning is not just a time, it's a battleground, and every day you show up and fight that battle, you move one step closer to becoming someone who can withstand the weight of life. This battle is internal. It's not about what happens around you, it's about what happens within you. The impulse to hit snooze is not just a moment of laziness, it's a statement about what you value. If you negotiate with that weakness, if you justify that delay, you've already begun letting chaos in. Because the day does not wait for your motivation to kick in. It will continue forward, with or without your intention. And if you begin from a place of compromise, you will continue compromising. But if you begin from a place of resolve, you will carry that strength with you. Order doesn't come by accident. It's not a natural state. It's earned, built, fought for. It comes through decision, through structure, through saying, I will not start this day in confusion. I will not enter it unprepared. I will create the terms. I will define the tone. That act alone, done daily, begins to hardwire resilience. Because when you do what is hard in the morning, you prepare for what is harder later, and life will get harder later. That's not a threat. It's a guarantee. There will be pain. There will be disappointment. There will be uncertainty. But if you've started the day with structure, you have a weapon against all of that. People think freedom is doing whatever you want whenever you want. But that kind of freedom leads to destruction. Real freedom is found in structure, in creating a morning routine that serves you, not enslaves you, that reminds you of who you are and what you're about. That prepares you to face the world instead of being overwhelmed by it. When you choose order in the morning, you are reminding yourself that life doesn't just happen to you. You happen to life, that you are not a passive character in your story. You are the one writing it, one disciplined morning at a time. Chaos always starts small. It whispers. It makes soft suggestions. Sleep a little longer. Skip today. You'll start tomorrow. It sounds harmless. It sounds reasonable. But every time you say yes to that voice, you give it power. And every time you give it power, it grows. Until one day, it's not just your morning you've lost. It's your direction. Your fire, your sense of meaning, that's why this moment matters. That's why you have to win it. Not just once. Every day, because every day chaos returns. Every day it wants back in. And every day you must decide. Will you let it in or will you stand your ground? Standing your ground doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean you have to rise with some cinematic intensity every single time. It means you rise with intention, even when you're tired, even when you're discouraged, especially when you don't feel like it, because those are the moments that matter most. When it's easy, it's not growth. It's maintenance. When it's hard, that's when strength is forged. That's when you build a reputation with yourself that says, I do not fold, I do not run, I do not let chaos decide how my life will go. And this is not just about waking up. It's about what you do once you're awake. The actions you take, the habits you build, the rituals you commit to, they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be complex, but they do have to be intentional. Maybe you read, maybe you move. Maybe you pray, maybe you reflect, but you do something that anchors you, something that demands attention, something that reminds you this is your life, and if you don't own it, something else will. Because everything in the world wants your attention, everything is trying to pull you off course. Social media, news, stress, doubt. The world is loud and relentless, but the morning, that's where you take back control. That's where you set the compass, and if you don't set that compass first thing, you'll drift. You won't even realize it until you're far off course, but by then, the chaos has momentum. It becomes harder to stop. That's why the morning must be protected, defended, respected. You don't wait for the war to start preparing for the battle. You prepare before it begins. That's what the morning is. Preparation. Fortification. Strengthening the walls before the enemy arrives, because it will arrive in the form of pressure, in the form of fatigue, in the form of temptation, and when it does, your preparation determines your outcome. You won't always win, but you'll be ready. You won't always be perfect, but you'll be strong, because you started the day by choosing order over chaos, and that choice reverberates through every other one. People talk about purpose like it's some grand mystical thing, but purpose is built on decisions, daily ones, small ones, repeated ones, and the most important decision is how you start your day. Are you reacting or acting? Are you chasing or building? Are you drifting or deciding? That's what this comes down to. Not motivation, not inspiration, decision, discipline, clarity, and that begins not when life demands it, but when you wake and decide to demand it from yourself. That's the first victory. That's the real battleground, and the one who wins that battle wins the day. There's a certain kind of silence that only exists in the early hours, a stillness untouched by distraction, a quiet that exposes everything within. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the confrontation with yourself. That moment when no one is watching, no one is clapping, no one is validating, and you are left alone with the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. That's where identity is forged, not in the presence of others, but in the absence of them, not in the spotlight, but in solitude. Because when the noise dies down, when the applause stops, when the crowd disappears, all that remains is discipline, or the lack of it. Discipline is not something that magically appears when life demands more from you. It's not a feeling that arrives at the right time. It's something cultivated in isolation. It's built through repetition, through routine, through rising each day to do what must be done regardless of how you feel. And that process, that consistency, that willingness to keep going in the quiet, in the loneliness, in the boredom, that's what builds identity. Not the moments of glory, not the bursts of inspiration, but the invisible decisions made day after day, especially when there's no audience to impress and no reward to claim. In solitude, there are no shortcuts. There's no one to fool, there's no one to pretend for. It's just you, the clock, the task, and the weight of your own mind, and in that space you meet who you truly are. You learn whether you follow through or flinch, whether you push or quit, whether you obey your higher self or give in to the lower impulses clawing for control. There is no identity without discipline, and there is no discipline without solitude. Because only in solitude are your habits revealed, and your character tested without distortion. Solitude is not isolation. It's not loneliness. It's confrontation. It's the place where the masks come off, where the distractions fade, where you stop running from yourself and finally look in the mirror, not to judge, but to build, because you can't become someone solid while constantly surrounded by noise. You need the silence to see clearly. You need the quiet to hear your own thoughts. You need the space to wrestle with your demons and refine your purpose. The world moves fast, but identity takes time. It takes intention, and intention grows best in solitude. People search for confidence. They chase self-esteem, but those things don't come from compliments or comparisons. They come from discipline. From knowing that when it was just you and the work, you showed up. From knowing that when no one else cared, you cared. That when it would have been easier to quit, you persisted. That kind of confidence isn't loud. It doesn't boast. It doesn't need validation, because it's rooted in something real: repetition, commitment, strength under pressure, and that only comes from discipline practiced consistently in solitude. There's a reason the greatest warriors train in silence. There's a reason the most powerful minds embrace the morning. It's not about routine for the sake of routine. It's about shaping something inside that the world cannot touch. Something grounded, something stable, something that doesn't change with opinion or trend. When you build discipline in solitude, you become unshakable, not because you've conquered the world, but because you've conquered yourself. You've proven that your actions are not determined by emotion, and your choices are not dictated by mood. You are no longer at the mercy of the moment, because you've built something eternal within. You have to understand that the easy path has consequences. Giving in to comfort when no one is watching feels harmless in the moment, but it chips away at the core of who you are. Every skipped routine, every delayed effort, every broken promise to yourself becomes a vote for weakness. And weakness, when repeated, becomes identity. You don't just become someone who missed a workout. You become someone who avoids hard things. You don't just become someone who slept in. You become someone who breaks their own word. And that erosion doesn't happen in public. It happens in private, in silence, in the moments you think don't matter, but the opposite is also true. Every time you act with discipline, even in solitude, especially in solitude, you cast a vote for strength, for integrity, for identity. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who reacts, but someone who decides, someone who chooses order over chaos, purpose over pleasure, growth over stagnation. And you carry that with you, not in a boastful way, but in a grounded way. A way that says, I've been through the fire and I didn't fold. That kind of identity doesn't crack under pressure. It doesn't dissolve in crisis. Because it wasn't built in comfort. It was built in the cold, in the quiet, in the early hours of the day when everything inside you screamed to stop, and you kept going. That is the birthplace of power. Not in how loud you are, not in how much you show off, but in how deep your roots go. And roots are formed in the dark, beneath the surface, through quiet repetition, through boring discipline, through lonely consistency. And every day you show up in solitude and do the work. Those roots grow deeper. They don't look impressive. No one claps. No one notices. But one day the storm comes and you don't fall. and people wonder why. It's not because you're lucky. It's because you built a foundation when it wasn't convenient, because you honored your commitments when no one else would, because you didn't need attention to stay focused. You needed purpose, and purpose was enough. When you rely on external motivation, your discipline will always be fragile. It will break the moment the circumstances change. But when your discipline is forged in solitude, when it's internalized, when it's no longer about proving anything to anyone, but about aligning yourself with something higher, then it becomes indestructible. Because now it's not about the outcome, it's about who you are. And who you are is not someone who waits for inspiration. Who you are is not someone who performs for applause. Who you are is someone who shows up. No matter the mood, no matter the weather, no matter the pressure, discipline in solitude is the purest form of commitment, because it's unseen, uncelebrated, undistracted. It's between you and the standard you've set. And that relationship with your own standard determines the quality of your life, not your potential, not your intentions, not your talent, but your consistency in private. That is what makes the difference between those who talk about growth and those who become something different entirely. You don't become exceptional by accident. You become exceptional by outlasting distraction, by silencing excuses, by facing yourself in the quiet and choosing to rise. There is no hack, no shortcut, no substitute. The life you want begins with who you become, and who you become begins with what you repeatedly do when no one's watching. That is where the real transformation begins, not in the noise, but in the silence. Not in the rush, but in the stillness, and not through inspiration, but through disciplined action repeated in solitude until the person you once hoped to be becomes the person you see in the mirror. Confidence doesn't begin in talent, and purpose doesn't emerge from chance. Both are born in structure, not rigid systems meant to confine, but deliberate frameworks that allow strength to grow, clarity to deepen, and direction to solidify. Structure is not just a matter of planning your time. It's the decision to treat your life like it matters. It's the refusal to drift aimlessly through the day, hoping for momentum to carry you forward. Without structure, even the most gifted mind collapses under the weight of distraction and indecision. But with structure, the average individual becomes powerful, not because the world changed, but because their internal order began to reflect who they chose to become. The problem most people face is not a lack of potential. It's a lack of alignment. Their actions don't match their vision. Their habits don't match their goals. Their days are scattered, and so their identity is scattered. They move from one thing to another, pulled by urgency instead of guided by intention. And this disorganization breeds confusion. It breeds insecurity. Confidence cannot exist where chaos reigns. Because when you don't know where your time is going, when you don't know what your priorities are, when you're constantly reacting to life, how could you possibly feel stable? Structure is what gives the mind a framework to focus, and focus is what gives the soul something to aim at. That is where purpose grows. Purpose is not some mystical discovery you stumble upon while waiting. It's built through consistency, through patterns, through decisions made day after day that begin to take shape. When you wake with structure, when you start your day with order, when you create systems for your thinking, your movement, your reflection, you begin to recognize what matters. You start to see through the fog. You begin to differentiate between what is urgent and what is essential. Structure separates the noise from the signal. It says, "This is where I am going. This is what matters today. This is how I will move through the world." That clarity is rare, and it only comes when life is no longer lived reactively. There's a kind of power that comes from keeping your word to yourself. It doesn't require anyone else's permission, no applause, no recognition. Just the quiet realization that you are capable of following through, and that feeling, repeated daily, builds confidence, because now you don't need someone else to tell you what you can do. You know. You've proven it. Structure gives you that opportunity not to control everything, but to control what you can, to eliminate randomness, to eliminate the excuse that you didn't have time or focus or energy. Structure says, time will not own me. I will own it. Energy will not scatter me. I will direct it. Life will not decide my direction. I will. Confidence is not some feeling that drops out of the sky on a good day. It's a byproduct of preparation, and preparation is built through structure. Think of the athlete, the artist, the leader. None of them rely on motivation to get up and do what must be done. They have systems. Discipline, patterns that don't care whether today feels inspired. They move regardless, because their structure tells them who they are before the world has a chance to define it for them. That is identity rooted in action, not emotion. And it creates a kind of stillness, a certainty, even when everything around them is uncertain. Purpose is not loud, it doesn't shout. It doesn't seek approval. It hums beneath the surface of a structured life, guiding, shaping, aligning. Without structure, purpose stays buried under distraction and confusion. But with it, purpose rises. You start to see the patterns. You notice what energizes you and what drains you. You feel the pull towards something meaningful, not just because it's appealing, but because your life is no longer cluttered with everything else. Structure clears the space for purpose to speak. It builds the frame within which your highest calling can come into focus. Most people live in cycles of reaction. They check their phones before they check their thoughts. They rush before they plan. They scroll before they reflect. And in doing so, they surrender the most valuable part of their day, the beginning. When you build structure into your morning, when you anchor your routine in things that matter, when you decide that your mind, body, and spirit will not be neglected, you are not just organizing your time. You are declaring that your life matters enough to be organized, that you are worthy of clarity, that your vision deserves discipline, that your future is worth protecting from chaos. Structure demands boundaries. It requires saying no to what doesn't serve your direction. It forces you to confront the discomfort of discipline, the challenge of repetition, the inconvenience of saying, not now, when everything inside you wants ease. But it's in that friction that confidence grows, because every time you choose structure over impulse, you gain strength. You become more reliable to yourself. You become more grounded, more focused. And that internal steadiness becomes visible to others, not because you brag about it, but because it radiates from the way you move. Disorder breeds doubt, not just about what you're doing, but about who you are. When your environment is a mess, when your schedule is reactive, when your priorities are constantly shifting, your sense of self fractures. But structure restores integrity. It realigns what you do with what you value. It builds a bridge between your ideal and your reality. And walking that bridge daily creates momentum. Not because you're chasing something far away, but because you are consistently becoming the person who no longer needs to chase. You're creating alignment. That alignment is where fulfillment lives. Without structure, stress rises because everything becomes urgent and nothing is prioritized. Every task feels like pressure. Every decision feels like a burden. But when you live by structure, stress decreases. Not because life gets easier, but because you are stronger. You know what matters today. You know what can wait. You know what your energy must serve and what it must ignore. That kind of clarity isn't just productive, it's powerful. It makes you effective under pressure. It makes you calm in chaos because the foundation is already set. There's a misconception that structure is boring, that it kills creativity, that it limits spontaneity. But the truth is, structure is what gives freedom its shape. Without it, freedom becomes recklessness. It becomes the kind of wandering that never finds direction. But with structure, creativity flourishes, energy flows, ideas rise because they have a place to land. You're no longer fighting to make time. You've already made it. You're no longer battling distraction. You've already chosen focus. That is what structure provides, a space where the best version of you can emerge consistently. Every day without structure is a gamble. You wake up hoping for clarity, hoping for focus, hoping for momentum. But those things are not found, they're built. They're built in the systems you design, in the boundaries you set, in the routines you commit to, not because they're easy, not because they always feel good, but because they reflect something deeper, a decision that your time, your life, your mind, and your purpose matter enough to organize. That is the starting point of confidence. That is the foundation of purpose. And that foundation is laid, brick by brick, through structure. There is something profoundly misunderstood about greatness. Most people assume it is discovered in grand moments, in accolades, in applause, in the eyes of the world, when it finally turns to look your way. But that is not where greatness is born. That is where it is seen. Its origins are elsewhere, deep in the quiet, long before anyone notices, long before any result exists to point to, long before the noise of recognition ever arrives. Greatness is not something that happens to you. It's something that is forged slowly and painfully in private, when no one is clapping and no one is watching. This is the uncomfortable truth most avoid, because the spotlight is seductive. It creates the illusion that progress is made when people see it, that validation and visibility are the same thing as value and transformation. But the opposite is true. If you're waiting for the world to see you before you start working, you've already lost, because what the world sees is only the surface. The real transformation happens when the doors are closed, when it's just you, the work, and the silence. That silence, that solitude is the forge. That's where the fire burns. That's where identity is tested. That's where the habits are built. That's where the weakness is stripped away. The quiet is not glamorous. It's not exciting. It doesn't feed your ego. But that's exactly why it's necessary. It demands that you do the work for the right reason. Not for attention, but for alignment. Not for applause, but for purpose. The quiet holds a mirror to your motives. If you only move when the world is looking, then you are not becoming stronger. You're performing, and performance without character always collapses eventually. Because the spotlight amplifies whatever you've built. If you've built strength, it amplifies strength. If you've built lies, it amplifies lies. That's why you must build in the dark. You must suffer in the quiet. You must endure in solitude, so when the light comes, you are already prepared. In the quiet, there's no external pressure to impress, no one to compete with, no noise telling you who you should be. Just you, your weaknesses, your ambition, and the decisions you make. That is the training ground. That is where greatness is separated from mediocrity. Not in moments of fame, but in the routine, in the discipline, in the deliberate repetition of the right actions, day after day, even when there's no immediate reward. Especially then, because those are the moments that shape your identity, that prove you are not dependent on motivation or approval, but guided by principle and vision. It's easy to look strong when everything is going well. When you're celebrated, when you're winning, but who are you when it's dark, when nothing's working, when no one believes in you? That's when it counts. That's when you find out if what you built is real. The quiet will ask you to keep going when everything inside you says stop. It will ask you to rise again after failure, to remain focused when distraction feels like an escape, to recommit when results are nowhere to be seen. And in that process, a new version of you begins to emerge. Not the version shaped by circumstance, but one carved through perseverance. Most people want shortcuts. They want the secret formula, the quick path to result. But greatness is not a destination. It is a consequence of thousands of small decisions made without fanfare. It's in the early mornings when you train before the world wakes up. It's in the late nights when you reflect, refine, and prepare. It's in the hours spent practicing the craft no one understands yet, the sacrifices no one sees, the moments of doubt no one knows you're battling. That is the quiet, and that is where the work gets done. The noise will come eventually. If you do the work long enough and well enough, people will notice. But if you didn't build in the quiet, the noise will destroy you, because you'll be addicted to it, dependent on it, needing more of it to feel worthy. But if you forged your identity in solitude, then the noise is just background. It doesn't define you. It doesn't sway you. It doesn't own you, because you've already done the work. You've already fought the battles. You've already faced yourself, and you came out the other side unshaken. This is not about hiding from the world. It's about preparing for it. So when the world comes with pressure, with expectations, with distractions, you're ready. You don't flinch, you don't fold, because your strength was not built in public. It was forged alone, when no one was looking, when it was just you and the grind, you and the vision, you and the mirror. And what you did in those moments matters more than anything that will ever be said about you. Think about the tree that grows underground before it breaks through the surface. The roots go deep first. They stabilize, they strengthen, they expand where no one can see. And only then, when the foundation is strong enough, does the tree rise. That's what greatness is. Deep roots in the dark, quiet strength, invisible growth, until one day you emerge, and the world thinks you came out of nowhere, but you didn't. You were working all along. In the dark, in the quiet, in the silence where real growth happens. There's a kind of self-respect that grows in solitude. When you do the work no one told you to do, when you push without praise, when you remain consistent without external pressure, that's when you begin to respect yourself. Not because you're perfect, but because you're disciplined. Not because you've arrived, but because you're becoming. And that becoming is rooted in solitude, in repetition, in showing up day after day, regardless of what the world is doing. The spotlight may come. It may not, but it's irrelevant, because greatness isn't determined by how many people know your name. It's determined by how many battles you've won against yourself. How many times you've kept your word when no one else would know. How many times you've chosen growth over ease, discipline over distraction, purpose over pleasure, and those decisions are all made in the quiet, not when the world is watching, but when you are. And that's the only audience that matters. You don't need more attention. You need more consistency, more discipline, more clarity, more silence. You need to stop waiting for permission and start building with precision. Because no one can give you greatness. No one can hand it to you. It must be earned when it's hard, when it's boring, when it's lonely, when it doesn't feel worth it. That's where it lives, that's where it waits. And only those who endure the quiet long enough ever reach it. Only those who trust the process more than the praise ever touch it. That is the truth. The harsh, beautiful truth. Greatness is not in the spotlight. It's not in the likes or the trophies. It's not in the performance. It's in the preparation. It's in the silence. It's in the early morning cold and the late night discipline. It's in the grind no one understands but you. And when you've built it there, when you've bled in the quiet, the light no longer matters, because you already know who you are, and no one can take that away.